Greetings, metalheads. Welcome to the Friday 13th YouTube channel. Today, I've got a fantastic interview for you to check out. This is a band called Katagory V, a fantastic progressive power metal band from the US. The band have finally released their fifth album called Resurrect the Insurgence. It originally released in 2015, now released on Metallic Blue Records. So check it out, metalheads. I'd like to thank Dustin for doing this interview. So if you do like progressive power metal, especially if you're a big fan of Fates Warning, these guys need to be heard. Anyway, thanks, guys. Leave some comments. Please share this interview. Thanks for watching. More review interviews coming soon. Greetings, everybody. It's Jason here from Friday 13th. I'm talking to Dustin from Katagory V. Welcome to Friday 13th, Dustin.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Good. So I'm going to ask you some warm-up questions first. This is the first interview we've done, believe it or not, even though I've reviewed all your albums. When did what instrument did you learn to play as a child? Was it bass guitar? Did you learn guitar or vocals or drums? What kind of happened?
I actually started out with piano against my will. I didn't want to do piano, but that's, typical for children, I guess, to start something simple with the family piano. But my dad was a radio DJ, and I always found it fascinating watching MTV growing up. And I thought, I'd like to do that rather than play records like my dad does. I want to get on stage. That'd be fun. So I decided I wanted to play bass because that was the instrument that spoke to me the most. A lot of my favorite artists, when I was listening to the bass, it was very bass heavy music. And I always thought that would be fascinating to kind of dive into that side of the instrumentation, because when I started getting into like a lot of the hard rock and metal when I was 13, 14 years old, the bass sometimes get mixed out, and I'd always felt that was jaded. So I wanted to be in a band where the bass was like Steve Harris, where it was up front, or Chris Squire, where it's just very much in part of the music, or even like Lemmy. It's very central to it. So I didn't really know how to play bass. So I ended up starting with a guitar next with a bass. I just learned how to try, and so I understood what fingering was and how I could write songs. And then I wanted to start playing bass again, but that I didn't do that. I actually didn't start playing bass for another almost 7 years. And then I got into Katagory V, and they had two guitarists already. So I said, oh, good, you guys know how to play the music I want to play, so I'll play the bass, because every bass player we would probably run into, we just want to play like the guitar player, and I wanted a bassist that's going to be very central to it. So that's why that was my evolution, so to speak, through the instrumentations.
Okay, then. So besides Steve Harris and Lemmy, like you said, as inspirations, who else inspired you as a bass player?
Oh, John Wetton for sure. I mean, I even got my John Wetton signed Asia album up here. John Wetton for sure. And Bones, DiBiase, Fates Warning. That was probably one of the guys that really captured my ear when I heard Perfect Symmetry when I was 14 years old, hearing that syncopation with the bass against the kick drums. From that point forward, I was like, that's where I want to go. That's that direction.
To be honest with you, Dustin, you can definitely hear Joey's bass when you're playing.
Oh yeah. I'm surprised he hasn't sued me yet. I would hate for that to happen, because I do emulate Joe DiBiase a lot. In fact, we make
have you heard his new band? Have you heard his new band, Wither in Scorn, with the Rover brothers?
I haven't heard it yet. Ooh, I've got the album. I just haven't listened to it yet.
Listen to it, man. It's good.
Yeah, that was one of the key points, is because I love what the Drover brothers do, but when I heard that when Bones McGee was doing it, I was like, oh shit, I don't care anymore. I will take my money. I don't care what it sounds like. I'm going to buy it just for that reason alone. Sadly, I haven't listened to it yet, but I do have it in the vast collection here, getting ready. I'm sure you'll probably see my review of it probably in the coming months for sure.
Right. And so what about other bass players? Is anybody like Glenn Hughes, Ian Hill, any of them kind of people?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I think one of the most underrated albums with Hughes is that Hughes Thrall album. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I've got it.
That kind of stuff speaks to me, because because my dad was a radio DJ in the 80s. A lot of that whole focus around like 80s pop, anything like that, I usually get made fun of, even from the other guys in the band, because I'm the baby in the band. I'm the youngest guy. So I kind of like, 80s Rush is my favorite era, or like, I actually really like the one Saxon album everyone hates here in the States, which is has the Christopher Cross song on it.
Is it the Destiny album?
Yes. It's like one of my favorites. And of course, my drummer, Matt, me and him will make fun of each other because that's one of his least favorite albums. But it's one of my favorites because I was kind of in that age period where that was kind of, interesting. And of course, as me as an adult now, I can understand, like, when I speak with younger metalheads, that are fans, they talk about how like certain, like that period of Metallica, like Load and Reload, was kind of very influential for him. And me, I'm like, I don't know, man. All right, good for you, but not for me.
Yeah. So I mean, when you say like Fates Warning, do you have like a favorite John Arch album, a favorite Ray Alder album?
The John Arch ones are really hard for me to make a favorite because I got into that one later. The Arch era was a little later for me, by mistake, actually, by accident. Back then, you didn't have the internet, so you kind of took what you could from the magazines that you could read if you could find any. And I knew that they had a singer that was before before Alder, and I just never knew much about what those albums were or anything. So definitely for the Ray Alder era, it would be Perfect Symmetry, because that was the first album I ever owned and listened to from them. That was a sonic assault that just boxed me about my ears. And ever since hearing that, it was always like, I didn't even know what to call it, because at the time when I listened to that album, I've heard like Iron Maiden, I've heard Metallica, I've heard like some of the, the more hair metal bands like Winger and Dokken. And they kind of were like, kind of in that middle area where they weren't quite thrash, but they weren't butt rock. It was just kind of this middle area, and I really loved it so much. So anything, I met a friend of mine, his name's Doug. We'll just call him Doug because he's a badass. But this friend of mine, he was a little older than me, and he's like, oh, Fates Warning, they're called progressive metal. And I'm like, oh, so there's a name for it. Right. So anything, like if I read a magazine and I saw progressive metal, band, Watchtower, progressive metal, I don't even have to hear it. I'm buying it right there. And so that Fates Warning was kind of that catalyst. When I got into the John Arch era, I know I'll kind of spin off on a little bit here on a tangent. But when I got into the John Arch stuff, the first album I believe I ever heard from them was Night on Brocken, I believe.
Yeah, first album.
And it was, my mother had got it for me for Christmas. I hope I did okay. And then a cassette, and I open it up, and it's that Fates Warning album. I'd never even heard of it. I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't know what it was. I'm looking at it and just totally mystified. I'm like, and I'm tearing the plastic off. I'm like, who's in the band? What is this? This was a shock to me. And she's like, did I do good? Did I do okay? And I'm looking at her like, are you shitting me? This is fantastic. You don't understand what you've got here. And she's like, oh, well, that's nice, sweetie. But it was gold. So for me, that album's probably my favorite because of that. It was my first time hearing John.
I mean, for me, my favorite John Arch album is Spectre Within, because I was 15 when it came out.
Oh, that was the third one. I heard
second one.
That was your second one?
The second album. Then for Ray Alder, for me, it'd have to be No Exit. But then I do like Parallels, and I do like Perfect Symmetry, but No Exit for me, when I heard Ray's voice singing that high, I was like, holy shit, this is awesome.
Oh, that's our guitarist Curtis. That is his absolute favorite album. And a lot of people tell us this all the time, but when they hear a lot of some of our material, that's what they kind of think of as Awaken the Guardian on certain songs. You can tell if it's a little Awaken the Guardianish, that was Curtis that wrote it for sure. If it's a little more technical and a little more syncopated, I probably did it. But if it has that more old school vibe of Fates Warning, it's definitely Curtis for sure, because he loves that album.
So Category 5, did you actually join the band for the first album? I believe you did, didn't you?
I actually started the band with Curtis in, let's say, 1999. I had moved from the industrial city of Ogden, which is about an hour north of Salt Lake City. And it's just kind of in a little industrial city, not a whole lot there except death metal and thrash. And I wanted to do something else. I didn't want to play death metal and thrash. So I moved up to Salt Lake and found some work up here and was just kind of, just keeping my ears to the ground. I was going to a lot of local shows back then to kind of see if there were other people that would be into this kind of music, this progressive metal stuff. And I had the girl I was dating at the time, who I ended up marrying, was going to school and had this guy that she had known that was a friend of hers that was into progressive rock. And she's like, he plays keyboards. Maybe you guys could hang out. And I'm like, keyboards, huh? I am totally interested. All right. Yeah, I'll give him a call. I'd love to see where this goes. Needless to say, we never did anything professionally. We hung out a lot and listened to music, but he exposed me to the whole UK neo-prog scene. I didn't know that was a thing. Pendragon and IQ and all that. And, that I went off on that one with him, but then he goes, hey, so you like those like metal bands that are like, Fate's Warning and Queensryche and Watchtower? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, I know a guitarist that likes that stuff. And I'm like, no shit. Well, give me his number because I totally want to hang out. And that was Curtis. So I ended up meeting him at a local bar, watching a band play, and we started talking and we set up some time to jam. And the first time me and him got together, and we were just kind of trading some ideas on the guitar. That was it. I was ready to get married. We're done. We're good to go. And that's where it started. It was just between me and him as the primary songwriters.
So, I mean, the name Katagory V with a K, was it spelt K for a reason? Was he another band called Katagory V with a C instead of a K?
No, for lack of better ideas, is why we chose the name and spelt it with a K. It literally was a joke because I don't want to give away some of the band name ideas because we still might put them as like song ideas, but because some of them are quite funny. But we couldn't agree on any names. But everyone seemed to agree on the name Katagory V is in the big storm. Well, I was the only one at the time who had internet access. So I did a cursory search on trademark names or bands that use that name. There's like 30 all over the place. Now, my guys can't call it that because there's all these other bands. And of course, they don't, they're no business mindsets. They didn't understand that. And I says, well, for me to get on board with this, I will, but we have to change the spelling so that way we have some identity or some kind of IP that identifies us and differentiates us from everybody else. And they're like, okay. And that became the band name after days of arguing for it.
So where did you meet the rest of the guys? How did you get together? Were they in different bands before the Katagory V got together? What bands were they in?
The drummer and me were in a band called Vivid Image, and it was me and another, and I played guitar in the band, and we had a bass player, and she kind of came into Katagory V at the start, but didn't jive and decided she didn't want to even play music anymore. That's when I pick up the bass. But we were a trio, kind of like an instrumental trio playing like really jazzy progressive metal stuff. So everything we did was like very kind of like Watchtower with no vocals. And we were all probably, between the ages of 17 and 19 years old. The guitarists, Curtis, and at the time, Ryan, were in a band called Arbitrator. And
I've heard of those guys.
And they were kind of like just US power metal kind of style. And the singer Lynn was the singer. He was in a band that was called Tanis, and he was the oldest of the crew. He was kind of our John Arch. He was the old man of the band. So the guys, Curtis and Ryan, knew him from the local scene in Salt Lake, where me and Matt were from the Ogden scene up north. From the death metal scene. And the only reason why the death metal and thrash metal guys gave us any credit is because at the time bands like Cynic and Pestilence were doing, and Death were really kind of doing these like extremely technical things. So we decided to do that. kind of go in that direction, play more technical death metal, kind of jazz fusion stuff, where we got some respect. Where when we moved up to Solid, we could actually do more progressive metal, like Fate's Warning kind of stuff, or Queensryche or Lethal. So that was kind of how that's where everyone came from. Was we kind of were almost two bands that kind of formed together, like the pieces of remnants of those bands, and then Lynn came in and hit in the middle, and we just went forward with that for 4 albums.
So, I mean, your first album was self-financed. I mean, present day. Why did you call the album Present Day?
We did it as a joke because here we are trying. It's like what that was 2000, early 2000s, right?
2001,
so,
yeah.
We were playing music that was here in the United States very unpopular, like extremely unpopular, and we didn't care. That was why we were like, it was kind of a joke, like here we are present day and we're still like clodding along playing this old heavy metal, where when we would play, before we'd release the album, we'd played a few local shows, and we were playing either with like bands that sound like Disturbed, or bands that were kind of more along the line, like death metal bands mostly, or kind of like more like Cold Chamber, like bands like that. Because nobody would do what we did at the time. It was very unfashionable, and you would see everyone scratching their heads for sure, because they didn't know what to make of it. Our singer could actually sing, and they were playing technical music, and it was heavy, but at the same time, most of these people were kind of disconnected from that. So that was pretty much it.
I mean, it's a really good album. I remember reviewing it, and it's like, say, Lynn's got an acquired taste vocals, and he stands out a little bit more from a lot of progressive singers. You kind of in the mood where you've got to love his voice, or you don't. It's kind of, you've got to have a day where you've got to be in a good mood to, if you know what I mean. No disrespect to the guy.
Oh, absolutely. And we kind of like, one of the reasons why we enjoyed him, and even why we have our current singer we have now that's in the band now from Chicago. Funny enough, Cyclone Temple from Chicago. You're wearing the shirt. But Lynn has a much more warmer voice. It's kind of depth and has more of a like Don Dokken kind of vibe, where it's not about being like a high screechy singer all the time. We kind of took that into note. That would be kind of a nice little thing that would set us apart. But we kind of struggled with it with a lot of progressive metal fans, because they wanted to hear like a very Alan Tecchio or Ray Alder, or somebody that was really high, the guy from Heir Apparent, somebody that was like constantly screeching, where Lynn didn't sing like that. And the only people that seemed to really get into Lynn's vocals were the Germans and the Greeks. That's it. Everybody else really has kind of struggled with his vocal style. Of course, now the singer we have now is our Ray Alder.
I mean, it was originally released. I mean, it was distributed by Nightmare Records and also Hellion Records in Europe. And then you went to your second album. That's when you signed up with Lance King, didn't you, for the Nightmare?
Second album was
it Metal Age?
Yeah, it was. No, it was I can't remember the name. But yeah, it was just a one-off label that it was a friend of ours. It was just trying to get off the ground, and he had us and another band called Byfist and Theocracy.
Oh yeah,
another one.
Yeah.
And so we were like the first roster of his bands, and it didn't go anywhere. It was too much for him to deal with at the time. So we ended up buying the licensing off from him, and using Lance from Nightmare as distro. And at that point, Lance is like, why don't you just come over here to Nightmare? And that's when we did that. Went to him after the third album.
You said that it was the second album. A new breed of rebellion was a good album. Obviously you had a label behind you, so you had a better production anyway.
We thought it maybe, but that album is kind of it's a little controversial bit of an album, because when we did the first album, that one was much more traditional metal, because it was two older bands, we were just recycling old songs, where the second album was all songs that we were writing together for the first time. And it's way more technical, way more progressive. And a lot of people did not really grasp that album. I mean, I remember reading a lot of the reviews at the time. It was just It wasn't working. So we struggled with that one. We had a label in Germany that wanted to have us sign with them, and
Which label was that? Which label?
I believe it was Lim.
Oh, LMP, yeah.
Yeah.
Lim Schooner, yeah.
Yes. And I don't recall who their A&R was at the time, but we'd sent them the finished product, and they says, "Oh, this is fantastic. We love what we're hearing, but could you do more songs like this song?" Well, I believe Sands of Time, because it was one of the holdovers from our previous album. So it has a much more traditional, old school US metal sound. And we were like, "No, the album's done. We're just asking if you want to license it or not." And they're like, "I'll tell you what, you guys go back and record 9 more of the same sounding song as that one, and we're in." And we were like, "Nope, we're not going to go back and rewrite another album." So that's why we ended up with Metal Ages. That's the record label. It's Metal Ages.
Yeah, Metal Ages, yeah.
The second album is Metal Ages Records. Right, correct. So that's how we ended up with Metal Ages Records.
You say the next album, The Rise in Anger, was that a more acceptable album for you and the fans? What do you find in your roots then?
That was where we found our footing, for sure. We figured out that we could still be progressive and technical, but then we could be, laid back and more simplistic, like on our first album. And that was more of where I envisioned the band from the very beginning, because for me, I wanted to have a band that was going to have like these arcs and ebbs and flows to the albums, where like if you listen to like a Rush album, they're not, some songs are technical, but sometimes they kind of have a pop feel, or sometimes it has a more hard rock feel. You kind of have these textures that run through it. And we wanted it. That's where when we got to the third album, I think we were kind of getting there, closer to that, where we could have like a song that's a little more melodic rock AOR, a song that's a little more power metal, one that's a little more progressive metal, just kind of that touches everything, so to speak.
So how would you describe your music? To me, you come across as progressive power metal. Do you agree?
Yep. No, I would say that would be the closest match.
I mean, when I listen to your music, I think of Fates Warning, obviously, Iron Maiden. I think of Mystic Force. I think of Power of Omens, 0 Hour. Is them the sort of bands that you kind of think you're close to?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I love the American power metal. I'm a big fan of Hellstar and Omen and all those bands. The European power metal, I call it unicorn metal. It's too many keyboards. It gets on my tits.
It's so funny. I feel the same way. I mean, the singer that's in our band now, Albert, that sang on our 5th album. We tease each other because he really likes the Euro power metal, and I kind of liked it in the beginning. I admit I've even got it's back there. There's a bunch, but you're right. It's like Disney metal. And to me, the way I always describe it, it's like choo-choo train drums. So, and then you have Ode to Joy melodies. Dun, 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 dun. And to me, 10 songs of that is just boring.
It's like blow your brains music. Yeah.
Where the US power metal guys got some grit.
Oh man, the US power metal, I fucking love it, Dustin. It's like I grew up with that shit, with new wave of British heavy metal. It's like I say, Omen, Hellstar, Sentinel, Beast, all them bands, Savage Grace. Awesome.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's where most of us are. The drummer for sure, Matt, our drummer, is me and him. That's kind of our background. That's where we started, really pulling a lot of our influences from. I mean, even I've got this shirt here with these guys. The singer of our band likes to tease us and call it bullet belt metal.
Okay.
Because usually when those bands like the more modern bands like Strike or Night Demon, Ambush,
Enforcer and them bands.
Yep. Those are the bands that kind of like emulate what we grew up listening to when we were like 13, 14 years old. So yeah, I totally get into that stuff all day long. I mean, especially when it's close to that US power metal sound, especially when we're getting into like Vicious Rumors territory. That was like probably one of my favorite American power metal bands is Vicious Rumors.
Yeah, I saw them a couple of months ago in Germany at the Headbangers Open Air. Great. Oh, they did 2 days. They did the Road and a Shrapnel, and then they did the Atlantic Years.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's fucking completely awesome. But I mean, Dustin, we're getting back to the next album, Hymns of the Dissension. That is a really good album, but I've noticed a lot of your albums are really hard to find, and you can only get them on Bandcamp as digital downloads. Is there a reason why?
Well, because the record labels that release them are not pressing them anymore because they don't exist, so they're out of print. And we're not pressing them because we haven't licensed them. We do have labels that have been interested in releasing the previous albums like as a box set, like as a collection. We still haven't decided if we're going to do that or not because Curtis and I have been taking some time and talking about possibly going back and having some of the earlier albums where we do have the material still, having it remixed. And we're not sure if we should or shouldn't do it, just have them remastered maybe.
I
So
don't know about
yeah.
remastering. I think remixing would probably be better because you get a stronger drum sound. With remastering, it's just a higher volume, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, that's why we haven't really decided how we're going to proceed. But we were able to, he's been busy salvaging all the material because we were back in the old days recording to DAT tape. So we weren't going into like a DAW or a computer. And so we've been slowly transferring, he's been transferring tracks over, and we're hoping to maybe see something happen with that. But, these days we're not really in a rush. We're doing it, but it's just not happening quickly. So everything's been basically secondhand, looking on Discogs or eBay, finding copies there is probably it. The only thing that's readily available at the moment is the re-release of our fifth album that was only released digitally back in 2015.
Right then. So if you were to pick a favorite back album that you've done recorded, which would you be favorite? Your back catalog?
Which one?
Which would you be your favorite back catalog album? Which one would you say is your favorite album that you've done with Category 5?
Probably Hymns of Dissension.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like that was, and it's sad because that was kind of where the band was imploding, but we were really, I think we found the creativity there because especially with Marc, the guitarist at the time, was contributing. We were finding that where we were able to like kind of pull in that that UK melodic rock vibe with the power metal and with the progressive metal and kind of make things happen that way. And that for me was really exciting because that's really kind of where all the bands in, a little, even thrash, a lot of speed metal and thrash on that album too. And we were kind of trying to make that, put all those genres together and be coherent about it, not be silly and trying to, slap it together. But, through the songs, you can tell which songs kind of lean more in what direction, which one kind of has more of a thrash metal vibe or which one has more of a AOR melodic rock vibe. You can kind of feel it, but that way the album kind of feels like you're on a roller coaster ride and it's not the same thing all the way through. So for me, that album is easily probably my favorite.
Okay then. So how many lineup changes have you had since you formed? How many different singers? Is it just the two?
Just the two.
Right.
The only kind of like little like historical asterisk in there is when Lynn was out of the band. It was right when the fourth album, Hymns of Dissension, was being released. We had a gig plan to do a CD release show for it. And of course, he's not in the band anymore. And we needed a singer pretty quick. So Norman Skinner from Magica at the time, who's now the singer of Forbidden.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
In. Yep, he flew in and did the show. And we didn't film it and we didn't record it. And I don't think anyone even took pictures. So
really?
But it did happen. It did happen.